Welcome to another episode of See One Beautiful Soul. My name is Barbara Heller, and I'm your host, and I am so grateful and lucky and honored to be here at this beautiful congregation. Is it pronounced Adath Yeshurun, or is it just Adath?
Adath Yeshurun?
Adath Yeshurun. Okay.
Or Adath Yeshurun.
Or Adath Yeshurun. Add it. And while you're
Adath
at it, go to Yeshurun. So, I was brought here by the amazing Rabbi Joshua Corber and Rabbi Bob, and I got to work with Chazan Lip, and we had such an amazing Shabbos together. We meditated, we sang, we nigund. It's a song without words. We prayed, we talked a lot, we ate great food. There's a special chef here. And we thought it would be fun and cozy to have a live studio taping of our podcast. Yay! And I get to interview one of my colleagues, but really one of my dearest friends, Joshua Corber. So give it up for Rabbi Corber. You can hear it, the studio audience. We are in, what do you call this, an assembly room? Or
Social hall.
Social hall.
This is called the Large.
The Large.
The Large. That's the special underground slang they have.
I had the distinct honor of knowing him while he was in rabbinical school, and he has not changed at all. And I mean that in the sweetest way, because he still has the same jovial, boyish spirit. We kind of grew up together as professional Jews. We've always been working in Jewish education. And, I'm going to cry. I cry a lot on this podcast. Joshua has this distinct midah characteristic of just having so much chen. And I don't know what would you say chen is in English?
It's translated usually as grace.
Yeah.
Graciousness.
It's more than graciousness. I've known him when he had a one bedroom, but even if he had a little studio apartment, he'd be like, come on in, let's bring everybody. Let's celebrate. He's just always into celebrating life. And right? You guys know him a little bit. He's been here for a little while, and he really cares very deeply about all people. And I think that's what makes rabbis great. I think a good rabbi really cares about their congregation, but I think a great rabbi or teacher really cares about all people. He really cares about humanity. And every time I talk to him, it comes up, every single time. And I noticed, because that's what this podcast is about. So when he asked me to fly up from Florida, in the middle of the winter, I was like, sure. And then it was 30 degrees. And then I was like, I gave my word. So I still flew up, and it was totally worth it. So thanks for being my friend, number one. Thanks for teaching me every single time I see you. Because that's the thing about him. He doesn't just teach great words of Torah, and he doesn't just learn them all the time and read so much, but he also exemplifies it. He's the kind of person that we all want to be, right? How did you come to want to be a teacher of spiritual things? How did you know that's what you wanted to do?
I suppose, like you, I always was a talker.
Why? Why do you say that?
I always had quite a bit that I wanted to explain to people, and I always had an imagination that exceeded my capacity to explain. And as a young kid, I was taken in by the lore of Judaism, the stories of Joshua and David and Jacob and Joseph and his dreams and the music. And I think that there was a significant, in my mind, there was a significant overlap between that world and the world that was presented through animation and video games in the 1980s. It was to me, it was all one sort of mythical reality that was a lot more interesting than what I considered the rather sort of dull, regular, kind of dreary Vancouver reality.
You just said dreary and Vancouver in the same.
Because
yes. I grew up in the flatland swamps of Florida.
Right.
So when I started going to Whistler, I was like, how could you not want to?
And Vancouver is gorgeous, but nobody goes there between September and April, which is, you know, there's 2 seasons. There's
Freezing
30 days of
and hot.
summer, and then there's the rest of the time it's a little bit dreary and depressing. But I really liked, as I got to be an older teenager, I really liked talking about spirituality. My eyes would light up and I would get excited, and all my friends knew me very well by that point, and their eyes would roll over and they go, oh, here he goes, he's going about religion again. And one of my closest friends, he observed like that I always kind of was a rabbi. Like you said, I was sort of born a rabbi.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're a born natural teacher. You like to share your knowledge in such a potent, loving way, because you're really like Martin Buber, like an I and thou person. He doesn't just like yell at this is what I'm going to say. It's like, do you get that? What do you think?
Yeah.
So I think that's what. And then, so you grew up in Vancouver, and then how did you come to know like Reiki and that type of spiritual knowledge?
So for your listeners that don't know, Reiki's a Japanese energy modality that has a strong overlap with meditation and spirituality. And that's that some people go in the clinical direction for pain treatment and treatment of diseases. And I kind of went more in the meditation realm. And I was dabbling without much of a path in the world of, especially Jewish Buddhism, which was like huge, and Buddhism and Hinduism, and studying this in school at the same time. And I ran into this very strange fellow on campus in the University of British Columbia, who was only a year or two my senior and was, taking courses just a few years ahead of me. And it was actually there was a Hillel Friday night dinner.
Yep. And
then we went and visited the Ukrainian club, because it was like 50-cent vodka shots. And I think it was in line there that this fellow, Japanese Canadian fellow, came up and asked me if I wanted to try Reiki. And I said, sure. And first time I didn't really, oh, interesting. He's giving me Reiki here in the hallway. And I didn't know about Reiki. And then I ran into him again on campus. And that time I think I felt something.
And can you describe what? Because that sounds a little weird.
It was very vague. So you put your hands out, and he puts his hands over your hands, and then kind of goes through the rest of your chakras. And I was familiar with the concept of chakras, about energy centers in the body, but it was very vague. Like I wasn't sure if I was pretty skeptical about it. Like I didn't really think much of it. But every night I had a practice of meditating in my room before going to bed. And that night, after the second time I got like a little attunement from him, it was different. I felt much more focused, and I thought maybe there's something to this. And I saw him on a few other occasions, and then one time, like that was it. Like I really felt something, and I thought, and we were working on, like, there was a pain that I had here, and he was explaining to me what emotional characteristic that had to do with, about controlling, not wanting to let go. And I was like, well, this is very powerful, and like this is like, I kind of had the feeling that this was something that I needed, that I'd been looking for a long time. And he agreed to train me for free, so long as I agreed to train others and heal others for free. Pay it forward. Yeah. And as growing up Reform and feeling very positive about there being a God and that Reiki was from God, that my Reiki training and my Reiki kind of practice that I did on people was Tikkun Olam. Like that was my
Tikkun Olam meaning. I'm going to translate for all the non-religious Jews and also people who don't know Hebrew at all. Right? Tikkun Olam means to literally heal the world or fix the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of letting things go, I think that was one of my hesitations when you first, agreed. I just wanted you on the podcast, but I was like, I feel like he's not going to have anything to say when I ask this next question. So I'm excited because we haven't even prepped for this. But Joshua, do you have a story that you could share with us about having to forgive someone or something? Or
yeah,
okay,
I have lots.
Are you guys ready? Because this is your rabbi. You're about to hear about what's going on here.
Start with a small one.
Whatever.
I'll start you with a small one. Okay. This one is
get comfy.
This one is it's just sort of like a cute. Fun one. It's not serious pain. It's not serious pain.
Okay.
I was at Kiddush lunch, at Ikar, where I know you've been there before, right?
Yeah, a synagogue in
And-
LA.
And just
Beautiful.
for people who don't know, the feeling there is it's like here, and it's very everyone welcome. If there's someone that you haven't seen before, you invite them to sit down at your table, and people from all walks of life from all over LA come there.
It's a sanctuary
And-
synagogue.
Yeah, sanctuary synagogue.
Which means
it was
everyone's
in
welcome, Jews, non-Jews.
in the large. We were in their large kind of social hall, having kiddush, and everyone was sort of going to the buffet, getting themselves seated, and I wasn't really with anyone or planning to sit with anyone in particular. I was gonna just sit down at a table and see who else was gonna come sit with me. And there was a group of people. There was actually, I think it was a bat mitzvah or something, because there were a whole bunch of people who weren't normally there. And I sat down, had all my stuff there, and then I went up to get, I don't think, a cup of tea or something, and then came back. And when I came back, there was a woman sitting there at that same table, and without saying hello or anything, she just was like, "Oh, we're sitting here." Like, and I was like, I was so taken aback at there's no hello, there's no would you like to sit with us, it's just go away, we're sitting here. And I was like, oh really, this place that I was already sitting? And she paused for a moment, she was taken aback, and it was like awkward, and she was like, yes, this place that you were already sitting. And I was like okay. And I got up and I went to another table and to sit with other friends, and they were like, hey, what's going on? And I was like, I couldn't even speak. And that's like a thing about my personality that it's taken a lot of work to realize and then overcome, is that like, I don't like being in conflict with people, and I really don't like when people are upset with me. Like that, hard thing to handle. But this was like, I like did not feel good at all. And I just was like, does it want to leave? And like, this is my shul. Like, who the hell is this?
Yeah.
Like, and so, but I just couldn't live with it. And so I went back over there and I said, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? And she said, and she looked at me and she said, if you'll forgive me.
Oh.
And like you could see like she had like tears in her, and she stood up and she hugged me, and like it was nice.
That is a cute forgiveness
It's like
story.
a cute little
Wow.
quick one. It's like a quick, because it all was within like a 5-minute thing.
So what really happened?
You mean
Like what really
at
happened
that
there?
lunch?
Yeah. Did you have a trigger from like being a little kid? Because I have a feeling you're like me, where when I was in middle school, this is where I had Mean Girls. I was not welcome at any of the lunch tables because I was like, when Josh and I found each other, we were like, oh my gosh, you're like my holy brother. Like, we're the same. We're super friendly. And most people at first, how many times does this happen to you? They don't believe it at first. They're like, what do you want from me? Right? Because most people don't get this. Like, we're hard on our sleeves kind of people. And his wife's like that too. When I met Chloe, I was like, okay, she's peeps, as Rabbi Bob would say. Like, she's one of us. But most people are not living in that world. So do you think, I'm totally projecting, I don't know if your childhood was like that. You sound like you had a great
I'm
childhood.
definitely sensitive, since I've definitely been very sensitive. Yeah.
But did it take you back to a moment? Is that where that came from?
I'm not sure.
Because you didn't say, and I'm not assuming you would, this is a very high level, but you and I both know people that are on such a madrega, a level that they would be like, from the beginning of that woman, oh, of course, take my spot. And it wouldn't even bother them. They'd be like, you have issues, but I'm going to give it to you. Take the spot, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think even now something like that would have bothered me, but I'd be different in the moment. Like, this was 10 years ago, like at least.
Sure.
So I've grown a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, was a lot more triggered.
But what else happened is that within 5 minutes, you became a tzaddik. You became a righteous person because you used it. Like, what I thought you were going to say the ending of the story was, I walked away and I forgave her from home. But instead, you went right back up to that woman.
Yeah.
And said, will you forgive me for being angry with you for being kind of a jerk?
Yeah.
And she immediately did what?
She also felt the need for forgiveness. It's very similar to the story you told today earlier.
Yeah. The one about my dad and forgiving my dad. Oh, the one about
the one about
Revengy. Yeah.
Yeah, where he doesn't,
he shows a picture of what you could be
he's
like.
the one really that's owed an apology, but by being kind, he ends up getting
a bit, not only an apology, but one that she would never forget.
And that's really transformative, because we want to be validated. We want to like feel, oh, I was wronged, and so I get my pound of flesh by getting my apology.
Yeah, eye for an eye. Let's go.
But really, what you really want is for relationships to be transformed and for people to transform.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And you did that.
In that instance.
Yeah.
In that instance.
So what's a deeper one?
So there's other
stuff.
There's
what's
I
the
got
hardest
other,
one? Let's go right to
I'll go to the
jugular.
hardest one. There are things about being a rabbi
there we go.
that really change the calculus of this kind of interpersonal thing about when can you expect forgiveness, or what are you going to be your standards for forgiving, and when can you and can't you expect an apology. And I've found over the years that it's not, I have to forgive without any expectation of an apology, without any expectation of contrition, or acknowledgement. And I think that there's a distinction between that and just, allowing yourself to be abused. Like that's totally different. And I also, there are people who might listen to your podcast who might be able to connect me to other synagogues, the synagogues that I used to work in the past, and I don't want, so.
But
obviously,
you've been a rabbi at multiple places, and
yep.
You've been a student and in the clergy and in Jewish education for a really long time. So you don't have to say specific names and places, but you can talk about instances of how someone acted.
But I wouldn't want. In case anyone out there is watching, I want them to know that it's all good.
Oh yeah, I don't see any in your energy field like I'm so angry at these people or this one person at all.
No, certainly.
And
because even the very difficult things about those experiences I now recognize were for my good. They're for my good. And that is it's easy to say now. It wasn't easy to say then.
Sure.
So I had, as a clergy, a problematic relationship with another clergy. And it was ridiculous. Like it was a situation that I felt that I shouldn't have been put in, and it was toxic and it was abusive. And there were several instances of public outburst that I was on the receiving end of that still didn't, end the professional relationship. And it got to, and I mean, it was the pandemic, and I had 2 kids to feed.
Yeah.
So I couldn't just leave the job, but that was what I felt was what I should do for help, because I couldn't, that individual, I couldn't, so, wow. What happened? We actually were, both of us were forced by the board to go into mediation.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And it was like the whole thing was just totally crazy. I just couldn't believe it. Was like science fiction. What was happening. But what happened? Something actually happened in those sessions. I'll backtrack for a second, because there's a general arc narrative that has nothing to do with anybody else, and it has everything to do with how I experience myself, what I think of myself, and how I experience conflict with other human beings. And this was sort of one of the big things that was, one of the bridges of that transformation. But, Chloe, God bless her, she's like
His wife.
my wife. She's like Bruria in the Talmud, who is, she is Rabbi Meir's wife. And when Rabbi Meir has these bullies in the neighborhood that are picking on him and that are beating him up, and she overhears him praying to God for their death. And she comes and says, "No way, mister, like that is," and she proves to him in a very rabbinic text-based style that he should be praying instead for them to make teshuvah. And like in that story, that's like make repentance for them to change, for them to not be
transform,
evil. Which is really, I mean, that Torah, her Torah, is really the Torah that we're talking about here. Like that's, and how different would Judaism be, and how different would the Jewish people be,
and the world
if our religion had been more geared towards that kind of Torah.
And the funny thing, not funny, the ironic thing is, it is.
It is. It's supposed to be, but her voice is an undercurrent in. Anyway, that's a whole other.
But I just want to highlight here that you're giving your wife that credit.
Yes, she has that credit, because when I was suffering from these different things that would happen, she would say, "Hurt people hurt people."
Yeah.
Meaning, this has nothing to do with you.
Right.
This has to do with those people.
Yeah.
And at the time, it didn't seem to mean much to me. Yeah. It didn't seem to help me very much. But I reached a point where and I don't know how I got there, but my own view of myself changed to the point where I felt competent as a rabbi, and that wasn't always the case. Not as a starting off junior rabbi in Calgary, and not as starting off having my own pulpit in Toronto. So having the confidence and the competence to really believe in myself, and I also I took a piece of Torah from Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who in his famous work about it's a what is it called, musar Torah, right? Which is, how would you translate musar?
Well, I happen to have studied with like a Baal musar, Rabbi Yitzhak Shurin at Midrash Rachel in Israel. Like when I went to yeshiva, I was telling you guys, in the middle of my 20s, I went to learn with him. And Rav Yisrael Salanter was the founder of the Musar movement. And basically what I learned, what got me into Torah, is that the Torah is a self-help book. If you look at it, it starts with the Bet, it ends with the Lamed. It's a love letter from God to the Jewish people, but really the whole world.
And why? And so Bet and Lamed, why is that?
Oh, because Bet and Lamed, if you put them together, you get the word Lev, which means heart. And so the Musar movement takes the word love, and in a somewhat masochistic Jewish way, Ashkenazi, Jewish way, is looking at it like you need to be a little bit hard on yourself to really get it. Not really hard on yourself, but if you change one characteristic, it's like you change the whole world.
Right.
By learning Torah. You learn the Torah to become a better person, not just to be a scholar. Okay.
And I was often guilty in my early spiritual life, my Baal Tshuva life, where I became, religious, and it was the Reiki, right? It was the Kabbalah. It was the lights and bells and whistles.
Yeah, the feel-good Torah.
And now that's called spiritual bypassing.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Where you go into these blissful experiences and you don't do the really difficult work where the rubber hits the road of this emotional stuff. And I was always very resistant to musar, because it was just like, self-criticism,
flagellation,
and you kick that can down the road, and you're gonna have to face that music eventually, right? So I took a page out of Cordovero's book in Tamar Dvora, which is his main, I think it's his main thing about forgiveness and forgiving others. Says, find one thing, whether it's a small thing or anything that a person does, and say to yourself, it's a little bit of a mental trick
Yeah.
that you have to play on yourself. And a lot of interesting that medieval stuff, it works.
Yeah.
You know, it is a mental trick. You could say it's a placebo, but it works. So you say you find this one thing that the person does that's of merit, that's a good thing, and say to yourself, it's enough.
Yeah.
That it doesn't negate any of the other, hurtful things that they're doing to you, but you don't judge them as a bad person. They're a person you're having a difficult relationship with, but you're trying to see the good. And in these mediation sessions, this, he was explaining to me what I did that upset him and why it was hurtful. And I saw, honestly, a lot of myself in him. I saw a little bit of my father, actually, and that I was coming up to the pulpit, whether it was High Holidays or the Bima, whatever, in a fashion less organized than I could have been, and that made his work with me difficult. And so even though it wasn't a moral or a personal offense that I saw myself committing against him, he was very upset.
It was a trigger for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I heard him, and then it was the first High Holidays that we were doing in person, and that was 2020. It was 2020, and we had this live streaming company, and so I had to be super organized because they had to put the page number on the screen for all the viewers at home. So I made it organized.
Okay.
I made a spreadsheet, and I have never been, and this was something that improved my own Bima performance more than anything, was
So it was a gift.
knowing everything
Mm-hmm.
and being able to call the ball at all moments. So that was an improvement just in my own right. But when he saw that I prepared that, and he felt seen, and he felt heard, and he saw a lot of merit in me, and then a relationship that was like really negative, really difficult, like in polite terms would be like, we had our difficulties, but we got over it. But like that, it was like more than that. It was
Sure.
it was difficult, and it turned into one where it was like we're peas in the pod. We were fine, and to the point where he'll call me now to see how I'm doing, and he would call me after he stopped working. That he would call me on a Friday just to check in, to see how we are, and genuinely, but there was never apologize, but I didn't need that,
Wow.
I didn't feel I needed that.
When he calls now and your phone lights up with his name, do you feel like proud of that accomplishment, or are you kind of like, ugh, it's him?
No, it's not that. It's like a genuine feeling of, oh, that's so nice that he's a
Beautiful.
yeah.
Beautiful.
And if you're listening out there, just it's all good.
Yeah. Aww.
It really is all good. I mean, he knows that. He knows that.
And maybe thank you for getting me more.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. No, I mean, it was all those relationships that are the most difficult sometimes are the most helpful.
Yeah.
Because look, where would Joseph be if he didn't have adversity?
21 years, 32 years. I always forget the exact amount of time.
Well, he was 17 years when he went
into Egypt.
And I thought that he was 34.
Uh-huh.
I thought that he was 17 years in.
17 and 17?
Yeah, and
Okay.
17, and so 17 is Tov. That's the gematria of Tov, and Tov
Meaning good.
good.
Yeah.
And I gave a drash here on Rosh Hashanah about drashing apart the word Tov because I'm saying Shana Tova. So what does that mean? Tov is the hidden. The hidden light, right? When God saw the light and saw that it was good, it was hidden. Also, it's got the same numerical value of egos, which is a nut, which is like, the good stuff is hidden inside.
Yeah, and usually the people that do crazy things are nuts. I'm glad you could laugh at that. So I wanted to say two things about that. When you just said so beautifully about the musar that you learned, where Rabbi Corber says to really try to zero in on one particular thing about the person you're having a difficult time with, that's good, that's tov, and maybe a little hidden. So that's part 2 of the meditation we did earlier today. So if you wanted to do it, I would just say, like, you can put one hand on your heart, one on your belly, and you listeners at home, you can take a deep breath in. And you can imagine yourself on one end of a bridge and a person that you're having difficulty with on the other end of the bridge. And even though it might look like frozen ice between you and the other person, just take a deep breath in and try to zero in on one good thing, even if they don't deserve it because you're so upset with them or frustrated. Just try to just breathe into one good thing there you go, one good thing that they have. And then as you do that, you can breathe out and kind of melt the ice, and from your heart to their heart, just see a bunch of like hearts all the way down, and then see them sending you love back, and see if that moves you a little bit. And then I usually like to take my hand and put it on my heart and kind of polish it off and kind of get rid of another layer. It's beautiful. I have a different direction I want to go now, which is what's our biggest problem as a Jewish people right now? Like, what's something, and you could say the world at large, but just because you work in the Jewish community, like, I'm sure it's just a reflection of the outside world. But what could we work on as a people? What could we work on as a world to become more unified? Like, what's going on? I'm sure you think about it a lot.
I do.
It might be hard to pick just one thing, but the number one thing.
I think it is the same problem that the world is having, and we're a microcosm of it. Woody Allen always said, "Jews are like everyone else, except more so." So we have it. So whatever is going on with the world, like if the world has a cold, we have pneumonia.
Yeah.
Right. So
maybe it's because our Jewish grandmothers are talking
we're so
about
hypochondriac.
it. Like, I have it worse. Sorry.
I have a fever. I must be dying.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a story. I was having a conversation with a retired Reform rabbi, and we were talking about just the state of things in the world. This extremism that's sort of really bubbling to the surface, and seems to be very violent and scary. And there doesn't seem to be anywhere in the world where it's not happening, and it's happening to Jewish people too. We're having a lot of Jewish extremists, and he told me about a time that he was on a trip, and I don't know what organization, but it was men and women, and they were at the Kotel Plaza,
the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem.
The Wailing Wall, yeah. And they were not at the wall part of the wall; they were in the plaza part of the wall where you're allowed to be mixed between men and women, and they made a minyan,
a Jewish prayer or group,
a prayer,
which is usually at the wall, just 10 men, and then the women do it on the side.
I heard someone come on the loudspeaker, and in English said, "The reforms are in the plaza. Go get them."
What?
Yeah. And they were just, and they were throwing things at them and shouting at them, and it was go back to Germany and go into a gas chamber and exterminate yourself.
No, those were the words.
And I mean, they were as they were being hurried onto the tour bus, like they were being spat at, and I mean we can disagree about how Torah is applied, but the problem is that, and I don't know, and I think it comes down to how, because it doesn't matter what sect.
Yeah.
You're going to have people of every faith, of every denomination, of every faith. And there's going to be a certain percentage of them that feel that way about other people, that like really just so lacking in compassion, so lacking in love. And I just don't know what does that.
Yeah.
Whether it's intergenerational trauma or
Yeah.
it's like we're not loving enough
Sure.
to ourselves. We're not loving enough to fellow Jews. I think we're probably like not loving enough within our nuclear families.
Oh, yeah.
And that is what's spilling out into the world. And I think that all of the problems that we face, whether it's climate or Russia, all of these problems, I think, stem from an emotional problem, a spiritual and an emotional problem. And I don't know whether to be more scared or more sad about it's one thing if a ship is going down like the Titanic and people are, doing noble things and helping each other, and you get on the lifeboat and let's pitch in and we're in this together. But I think unfortunately we've seen that there can be a global emergency and there isn't that feeling of we're in it together. And I don't know, like it's sad.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what you just said. That's such a beautiful way of saying it. Like maybe the question, the kasha in Hebrew, would be, is it going to be healthier for my mental wellness to be scared of what's going on or sad? And even though I'm not a big fan of like getting depressed, I think it's perfectly acceptable to feel sad in the place of feeling scared. I think that's a really beautiful way of looking at it. And only you would come up with that. But I want to welcome that, because I feel like if we could just be a little sad for what's going on instead of a little scared. Like scared means that actually we stop the love. But if you feel sad, then we have a chance to, my thing in my classes that I teach is notice what you're feeling, feel it, heal it, and then create something of beauty that you can teach whatever the wisdom is that you got from the difficulty in your life. And to me, sad is in there, but scared, that you can't do anything with scared. You just freeze.
Yeah, scared takes you in a different direction, because scared, scared, whatever it is that's scaring you has a power over you. Yeah. And you're scared of it. Right. And then that there's secondary and tertiary reactions to that sort of take you off course. Whereas, you can be sad about something, but still be kind of on course with compassion. Yeah.
I also wanted to go back to add to the prayer or the meditation that we did of the person on the other end of the bridge. So I also had a really weird thing happen once in my Jewish education experience. I had someone who worked above me who I guess was just, triggered by things that I did and said. And then I got very triggered by that person, because God always puts a match, right? We can all go down the line here in the studio audience, and you'd each tell me, right, when your head's nodding, if you were triggered by someone, chances are they were triggered by you, and vice versa. It's very rare that there's no charge on the battery, right on the other end. This chance recently I chose this Rosh Hashanah to write to that person. And I, instead of just giving them a Mechila letter, meaning like between Rosh Hashanah and really Shmini Atzeret, you have like 2 to 3 weeks.
What's Mechila?
Mechila. Thank you. We're both quizzing each other. So Mechila means forgiveness. I've worked at 100 Jewish schools and camps, and usually, like, if there's a difference in opinion or something, we both go, you know what? I don't think this is the right fit. So great working with you. Oh yeah, totally. See you later. Gesundheit. Hate. Love you. Like, there's a love. The way that it happened was so traumatic for me. And there's a little piece of me that's still in like pain from it, because it was done so awfully. But I used this Rosh Hashanah to write to them, these 2 people. And I said, what can I say besides just, I hope you'll forgive me? I'm going to also say, I forgive you. But I want to bring out like a few things that they did as an exercise. I must have been channeling this rabbi. I knew I was going to have this conversation with you. And it's a great thing to do if you have someone to write a letter of forgiveness to. You can even do it if they've passed, because it still matters. Your words and your thoughts become things in this lifetime. And the only reason we're here is to grow. That's it. It's not just to go on vacation, even though that's great. You should take advantage of that and be joyous. But really, it's to grow. So I wrote out to them, I hope you'll forgive me individually. I totally forgive you. You're 100% off the hook. And I just want to say thank you so much for this, this, and this. I did like 3 things for each of them. They also didn't ask me for forgiveness. And they also didn't say, you're forgiven.
Right.
But they said thank you. And that was enough for me. It was even enough just to send it. I felt this when I sent it.
Right.
And I felt like I unhooked, right? If there's a sewing hook, there's always 2 ends. And they're both sharp. However you slice it. One might be a hook, the other one be a point. But you have the option of making yours dull so you can move on, right? And I always feel like members of the Christian faith sometimes get this a little, just, it's more like rampant, like, oh, forgive from your heart. I don't know. Not every Christian has a Southern accent, but especially here in Kentucky, it's like, you just feel it. There's a, or at least that's my experience.
I think, Louisville is a very special place. And I haven't even really been to other places in Kentucky besides Lexington to pick up a couch. And the guy I picked it up from was like from Denver, so it didn't even really matter. But I've just found people to be like super kind here. Super.
It's amazing. And I don't know if it was always like that for us Jews being in the southern states, because, there were lynchings. We created the ADL from a terrible lynching that happened in the South. But I feel like times are changing, and I want to notate that, because yes, there's extremism. I see extremism everywhere. And I heard why on a bus once in Israel, and I didn't understand, I think, until this moment why, and I'm going to share it with you. I was once, when I was learning in Israel in yeshiva, on a bus, an Egged bus in Jerusalem, and I'm sitting next to this very religious looking Jewish woman with her hair is all bundled, and she's in her 80s at least, and beautiful skin, and she only talks in an Israeli and Yiddish accent, so she's kind of like this, and I sit right next to her because I felt such a warmth. And this man gets on the bus at the next stop, and he's wearing one of those streimels, the furry big hats. I still have no clue what this is. I'm very new, right, on this bus, and it's 100 degrees outside. And he's wearing like a kapata, this big long coat, thick pants, and the big, he must have been sweating and sweltering inside. And he gets on the bus and he goes, and he kind of coughs out this giant phlegm ball. Okay. It's called like a loogie, right? And it lands right next to our feet. And I know. And the woman next to me goes, ugh, Malchus. And I said, Malchus? What's Malchus? She goes, Malchus. It means kingship. And I go, king? Like Elvis? Like he's the king? What are you talking about? That was disgusting. She goes, I know, it's disgusting. I said, so why are you saying kingly? She goes, let me explain to you. She had like Russian, Yiddish, Israeli. She goes, in every generation, there's going to be a midah, a one characteristic. She goes, this generation is the midah of Malchus. I'm like, well, I didn't see a king. I saw a gross, disgusting moment. So I don't know what you're talking about. She said, on one side of the midah is kingship. I'm the best. I'm amazing. Me. Right? iPhone. The iPod had just come out. She was not the iPad. You remember those little, like the original, iPod. Like no iPhone yet.
Sure.
But the iPod, and she goes, me, self-help. I'm the best. From the 80s, right? Like from 1980, the me generation, right? 90s. It's getting worse, right? How many kids, everything's with an emoji. They can't even talk anymore. They text the friend in their room because they can't say, right? So on the one side is, I'm so focused on myself. I'm the best narcissist. But on the other side, listen to me. I have something to say, right? Like, look what's happening in Iran right now. The women are saying, I don't want to wear this on my head. I have a voice. Let me have it. There's a song one of our friends sings, I have a voice. My voice is powerful. My voice can change the world. That's a beautiful, it's a cantor friend of ours that like wrote that song. And it's such a beautiful idea. I have a voice. Well, sometimes it's a little deafening and you need to have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So there's like that push pull. And as you were saying that before, I was like, oh, that's why I learned that. So if we could in this generation, what would be your solution to that? How do we listen more?
Just means when someone is not being the way you want them to be, or someone isn't doing the thing you want them to do, get really, really quiet. I think more often than not, we are so quick to express disapproval, or some other masked form of it, or
the ego comes out.
The ego comes out, and we are, whether we're speaking it out loud or not, we're caught up in our internal monologue about why this person is, oh, what a putz that he's doing that, and just be quiet.
Yeah, maybe have more sadness about it instead of anger.
Well, as for the guy spitting, one thing you could do is you could say like, oh, maybe look, this guy is uncomfortable. Probably doesn't feel good. He wasn't doing it on. I don't think he was like, I'm going to show them my spit now, and I'm not right. I'm not saying that you were. I'm not saying that you were judging, but this is our, the ways that we can soften our disposition.
Yeah. No, I was totally judging him. There was malchus on both sides. And by the way, I forgot to say, the reason she said that is because Mashiach is going to be born from that moment of until we all become our mini leaders in our own communities and everyone's exemplifying, it's either going to go one of two ways. We're going to bring Mashiach and redemption of the world and world peace by trying very hard to bring world peace ourselves and not fighting, but actually finding the peace in every single moment, whether you're at the grocery store line and someone's being a jerk and following what he said and being kind to them, even in spite of their ego, or it's going to come because people are fighting so much that there has to be some sort of redemption because we will just basically kill each other.
It'll force us to, sometimes I was in Israel and I ran into somebody who I knew from Vancouver, who was religious. And he said, and he's South African and I'm Canadian, so we have a sense of decorum and politeness that just isn't shared in Israel. And he said it's a holy land, and it's like that for a reason, to show you see how you could be treating people. Like, this is like almost holding up an example of how not
interesting,
how not to act towards people. That meaning if someone is on the more meritorious side, they're going to be overly kind,
right?
But if they don't have that merit, then we're just going to be behemoths,
right?
They're going to be worse than the average.
I never experienced the chesed, the kindness, like I did in Israel. Like, I had people living near me in my dorm that brought me soup when I was sick,
right?
And I'd never experienced that before from a total stranger.
Right.
And also on the bus, right? If you say, I'm going to see this person over here, 10 people get up. Oh, let me take you. I know them. And do you have enough money? And let me give you some water and some snacks.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't happen in America.
They'll sometimes be a little bit brisk.
Oh yeah. Take my directions.
You'll never be like left alone in an emergency or anything like that. Like, someone's always
one family.
Someone always gonna, have your back there. Have you ever used the soap Dr. Bronner's soap?
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Are you guys familiar with this soap? Okay. And there's tons of tiny print. And now that I'm living in the States again, I'm happy because it's in Canada. Half of that has to be in French. All of the Dr. Bronner, and this guy, you got to see this documentary, Dr. Bronner's Magical Soapbox. This guy was the third generation, I think, of German soap manufacturers. They had their factory in Germany in the 1900s. Jewish family. Okay, they came to the U.S. before the war, and he inherited his father's, I don't know, the soap making. They didn't have a factory in the States, but then he started like developing this philosophy that he called the moral ABCs, and it was kind of like a modern secular version of Baha'i, which is that there's a succession of faith that that Abraham, Jesus, Muhammad, they were all trying to point us to the fact that humanity is one.
Oh yeah.
But it's the essence of the Shema, that
one beautiful soul.
Global unity, and he has this whole theory about spaceship Earth, unite spaceship Earth, and he was one of the first people to be biodegradable, and likes to support lots of grassroots social justice causes. But in the 1930s and 40s, if you started talking like that and got very excited and were like yelling when you were talking to people thought you were crazy. And there was a rule, one of the laws, I think it was New York State, that an immediate family member could go to the police and have you committed
for speaking loudly.
If the police thought you were insane, they could work on a relative of yours and just lock the person up because he was he would talk to people and people would think he was crazy. And so he gets locked into an asylum. But in that, your relative can check you out and take you out for dinner. So his sister takes him out for dinner. He goes to the bathroom, and he rips her off. He takes $50 from her purse, jumps out the window from the bathroom, runs away to California, where first he goes to Vegas. And he doubles his money, and then he starts a soap factory in California.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
He doesn't surface again to the 60s. But his whole philosophy is uniting humanity in love, and that's the solution. Right? I mean, that sounds very simple.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's one of the reasons I started my podcast. I was hoping more people could see that. Thank you so much.
See.